Houston. Houston, we have a problem. DJ Apollo has landed. I repeat, DJ Apollo has landed at Hipmix 88.9 WEIU.
Welcome to the Tales of Music and Film podcast. I am DJ Apollo, and I just want to say welcome back to the Tales of Music and Film. Today, I am super excited because today I am about to review one of my favorite movies of all time. And the movie that I will be discussing today is Apollo 13. Now, I have so much to unpack on why I love this movie so much. But I want to take you back in time for a minute. So I was actually introduced to this movie back in high school. We had to watch this movie in my high school science class when I was a freshman, and I got hooked on this movie instantly. I'll never forget watching it for the first time in the library. There was something about it that just really it just caught my attention. I ended up doing some research on it, and I found out the movie's name and everything, and I ended up renting it a couple of times. I ended up buying it for myself, and I'm surprised the disc that I own still works because I have watched this movie at least once a week for for many, many years now. And this movie is the reason that I became such a NASA fanboy. So a little fact about DJ Apollo, I am a huge fan of spaceflight. I just find spaceflight to be so intriguing to know that we have left Earth and we've ventured out into space, that 12 men have walked on the surface of the moon. You know, I love reading about the Mercury, the Gemini, the Apollo, and Skylab flights and some of the shuttle launches and everything. I've watched countless videos on YouTube for years now about all those space flights. I just find it so fascinating. The steps in history it took for us to make those major accomplishments, it blows my mind. And this movie is where it all started for me. And, of course, the movie is based off the true story of what was going to be the third moon landing. So we were supposed to land on the moon 10 times. NASA had a way bigger budget, but so as you all know, Apollo 11 was the very first moon landing in 1969 with the Apollo 11 crew, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. And then just months later, after they landed, Apollo 12 landed on the surface of the moon, and that was Pete Conrad, Alan Bean, and Dick Gordon. But by the time that mission finished up, public interest started to go down the drain because people got bored of it. Because both those missions were the time that they were on the surface was broadcast on TV. Well, 12 wasn't, because Pete Conrad accidentally aimed his camera at the sun and it burned out the lenses, so the live broadcast never got to happen. But anyway, by the time 13 was ready to fly, public interest was going down the drain, and NASA was losing money. And then, so by the time 1970 rolled around, Apollo 20 was canceled due to budget cuts, and then the Apollo 13 incident would cut down the flights even more. After the disaster, Apollos 18 and 19 were canceled, and they were just able to save Apollos 14, 15, 16, and 17. And then once Apollo 17 landed on the moon in December of 1972, that was the end of the Apollo program. Then they reused the Saturn V rockets that were going to be used for the last 3 landings to launch Skylab into space, and 4 crews would end up flying to that little mini space station in the early mid 70s. Back on Apollo 13, so by the time this mission was ready to go, public interest was going down the drain, and nobody cared about it. I remember Jim Lovell who was the commander of this flight, he talked about how like the newspaper had one mention of the space flight, and it was on the very last page, and it just blows my mind that people lost interest in space flights so quickly, you know? Like, we were leaving the Earth, going out, going on adventures in the space, making advancements in technology and stuff like that. So I cannot believe public interest was lost so quickly. And it also didn't help the fact that recently, the Beatles broke up literally like a few days before Apollo 13 launched. So of course, everybody was focused on that. That was like the headline news of the time. And of course, you had the Vietnam War going on as well. So there were just all kinds of different things going on. But yeah, so the history of this space flight is that, like I said, it was going to be the third moon landing. The crew for this flight was Jim Lovell, who was the commander of the mission, and he would be the first one to walk on the surface. And then Fred Hayes, who is the lunar module pilot. This is his first flight. Then you had Jack Swigert, who was the command module pilot. And Jim Lovell is one of my favorite astronauts of all time. And by this point in time, he held the record for most time in space because he flew 3 other missions before this one. And he's only one of 3 men who has flown to the moon twice. And his space flights were Gemini 7, Gemini 12, Apollo 8, and then this one. I think Jim flew, like, all 4 of his flights were all extremely unique. Like, Gemini 7 and 6 was the very first rendezvous mission. Then Gemini 12 was the last flight in that program where he flew with Buzz Aldrin, and they finally got the mechanics down of walking around in space. And then Apollo 8 was the very first time that we flew to the moon on Christmas Eve in 1968. And now Jim was getting his chance to walk on the surface on Apollo 13. So the 3 astronauts who have flown to the moon twice is Jim Lovell, Gene Cernan, and John Young. And so everything was going all right. So to get to the moon is a 3-day process of leaving Earth's orbit, and it takes 3 days to get to the surface of the moon. And on day 3 of the flight, let's see here. Yeah, April 13th, 1970, there was an explosion. So it wasn't until... So what happened was there was a damaged oxygen tank. The wiring to it, the covering for the wiring melted off because before the flight, they would do experiments and test runs of the tanks to make sure they operate correctly. And someone apparently emptied out the tanks by boiling out the oxygen. And apparently when this was done, due to how hot it was, the covering for the wiring melted off and nobody caught it. So that tank was installed into the command module with the damaged wiring. And just to give you a perspective of what that means, that tank is literally a ticking time bomb just waiting to go off. And on April 13th, the crew was getting ready to go to bed. They were just one day out from reaching the moon, and they had just finished their first live broadcast like an hour earlier. And Command told Jack Swigert to stir the tank, so he flipped the switch. And I would say about 20 to 30 minutes later, there was an explosion. Then you hear the classic "Houston, we have a problem" from Jim Lovell, and things went bad. Things went crazy extremely fast because they're losing oxygen, and the ship is floating around in every direction. They've lost control of it. Jim looks out the window and he sees that they're venting something out into space, and it turns out they're venting out their oxygen and the pressure is going down fast. So the crew quickly realizes that there is no way they're gonna be able to land on the moon now. Then they had to hurry up and turn the lunar module vehicle into a lifeboat because the Apollo vehicle, so you have the command module, and then it attaches to the lunar module. So there are two separate spacecrafts. So the lunar module had its own supply of oxygen and its own guidance computer and everything. So Jim Lovell and Fred Haise had 15 minutes to get this thing powered up and get it operating, while Jack went through the process of turning off everything they could to save power, because the explosion, they lost a lot of power and a lot of oxygen, so they had to save whatever they could. And then they were able to get all that figured out, and then the rest of the mission was mission control trying to figure out how to get them back home, combating problem after problem after problem. And the astronauts ended up getting themselves back home. They got home 2 days early, and they returned home on April 17th, and it was a miracle. And this was, in my opinion, Mission Control's finest hour. That they had a crew over halfway to another planet, and they were able to get them back home. And it's such an extraordinary moment in history of what human. It's a prime example of what happens, of what humans can do when they work together and they don't panic and they work out the problem. They go through every option before they decide on which one to use. I love it so much. It's such an extraordinary story, and I'm so happy that it was adapted to film. And what led to the movie being made is that Jim Lovell eventually wrote a book about his Apollo 13 experience, and the book was called Lost Moon. And Ron Howard was given the director's seat, and he wanted to make sure that he adapts this movie as perfect as possible. And I'm telling you right now, he did an amazing job. The movie does an amazing job of capturing this history and retelling it in the most respectful way possible, because making a movie is hard enough, but when you're making a movie that's based off real history, you have a lot of extra pressure because this actually happened. People remember this. And so it's so important and crucial that you recapture this the best way you can in the most respectful way, because you're representing history. And Ron could not have done a better job if he tried. Like, he was the perfect man for this job. He was extremely passionate about this movie, and it shows. It really does. And so the Apollo 13 movie was released on June 30th, 1995. The director was Ron Howard. The budget was $62 million, and the movie would go on to make $355 million US. So yeah, this movie was a huge success, and it won several awards. It won an Academy Award for Best Sound Mixing. It won the People's Choice Award for Favorite Movie in '96, and it won the Academy Award for Best Film Editing, just to name a couple. And one of my favorite parts about this movie is the cast. All the actors that they picked for this movie were so spot on, it wasn't even funny. And you have Tom Hanks playing Jim Lovell. You have Bill Paxton as Fred Haise. You have Ed Harris as Gene Kranz. You have Kevin Bacon as Jack Swigert. And you had Gary Sinise as Ken Manningly. So that's just to give you an idea. Like, this cast was stacked, and everybody brought their A game with this. I think my only complaint about the cast was that I don't think Tom Hanks made for a good Jim Lovell, if I'm being honest here. The original casting choice, like the real life Jim Lovell, wanted Kevin Costner to play him, and I wish they'd gone with Kevin. I really do. I think Kevin Costner would have been a better choice as Jim Lovell, but that's just my personal opinion. Like Tom did a good job. I think he did a good job, really, but I think Kevin Costner could have been a better choice. Another amazing thing about this movie is the soundtrack. The soundtrack was done by one of my favorite composers of all time. I consider him better than John Williams, James Horner. And his music in this movie, it's like John Williams' Jaws theme. It's just like, I just cannot imagine this music not being in the movie. There are so many amazing set pieces on here that just really capture. He managed to capture spaceflight with the music. It's so beautiful to see. And I just love the music he came up with. One of my favorite tracks was the music for during the launch sequence at the launch pad at Cape Canaveral. The music when the engines start up and you hear the countdown is just, it is such an epic thing to see. I love his music so much. And so the movie is one of those rare examples where it did a perfect job of adapting the history it's based off of. And you don't really see that too often anymore, because with most movies, when it comes to movies that are based off true stories, Hollywood, they Hollywood it, and they exaggerate a lot of things, and they make it, like more dramatic than it really was. And like there's not that many films out there, where they get the adaptation like perfectly. But this one is one of the rare occasions where it did a perfect job, where they actually had to make some scenes a little more dramatic, because if they hadn't, the movie would have been really boring. If they had adapted this thing like 100% to how it was to real life, it would have been extremely boring, like I said. And like there are many examples of what they did. Like, for example, there was a lot of drama between the crew and Mission Control in the movie. Like there are many scenes where the characters snap at Mission Control because they keep commanding them to do all these different things and to listen to what they tell them, and the crew gets frustrated because you got to keep in mind these guys for at least a week, like for not a week, but like 4 to 5 days, these 3 men were stuck in a command module in like icy temperatures. They were freezing. They couldn't sleep. Their food was frozen, so they couldn't eat very much. And all 3 of them would end up losing a huge amounts of weight. And things just weren't good for them, and they had to hold out, for all that time. And of course, most of us would be really cranky and tired in the situation. But in real life, none of the crew members complained once about their situation. And they were professionals from beginning to end, and they never freaked out once. They trusted Mission Control, and there was no drama. And the coolest part is, you can look up all the recordings on YouTube. Like, literally the entire flight is on YouTube. You can listen to every exchange they had during the entire flight, and it's so cool to listen to that's been captured. And another example is that there is a scene later on in the film where Fred Hayes had him and Jack get into a fight on the command module because Fred blamed Swigert for the explosion and everything, and they started having a verbal abuse battle to one another. Then Jim had to break them up, and in real life that never happened. Like, no one blamed anyone for the explosion. It was just something that happened that they had to deal with. But none of the crew members ever got into a fight, ever. They never lost their cool, ever. And So that's just a few little examples of Hollywood having to, make things a little more dramatic, just to keep the movie interesting. But I mean, they had to. But other than that, this movie did an amazing job of adapting the story, and the zero gravity sequences in this are beyond my favorite parts of the movie because they're real. Like, Ron Howard and his team were given permission to build the command module set inside the Vomit Comet plane. It is a plane that astronauts use to train for zero gravity. The plane goes super high up in the air, and it does these maneuvers where you get to experience about, I would say, 15 minutes of zero G. So you're floating, so you can practice what it's like to move around in zero gravity. So they would build the command module set inside the plane, and they filmed all the zero gravity scenes inside of that. Like, how awesome is that? That they went to that extreme level to make sure that they get this correct. Just like, I love it when film crews do things like that. It's those little things they do that make the movie so much better. It's so awesome. And I'm telling you right now, the command module set, it could be one of my favorite set pieces of all time. The amount of detail with like the inside the command module, the lunar module, and that little tunnel that connects the spacecraft together. Dude, the set is so beautiful. Just seeing all the switches, all the storage units, it's like you're actually there, and it's just, I just love the detail of that set. It's so breathtaking. And can we just like take a minute to talk about the visuals for this movie? This movie has some of the best visuals I've ever seen. Like, my favorite scene in the entire film, and it's honestly the most heartbreaking scene for me. What makes this story so tragic is that Jim Lovell never got to walk on the moon. It was his dream since he was a kid. And, it's like, imagine flying to the moon twice and no cigar. Like this was his chance. Like, this was his last space flight. And he wanted this to be the highlight of his Navy career, and it just wasn't meant to be. And the scene where Lovell is looking out the window, so in order to get back home, what the crew had to do was they had to use the moon's gravity field to slingshot them around and set them on a course back to Earth. So while they were going around the moon, like they were all looking out their window, studying the surface as much as they could, because this is the only chance they're going to get to see it up close. And fun little fact for you, the Apollo 13 crew still holds a record that has yet to be broken over 50 years later. Due to the trajectory they had to use to go around the moon, they hold the record of the longest distance humans have ever traveled from Earth, and that still holds to this very day. And the scene where Jim is looking out the window and it cuts to him daydreaming about what he would have done if he was on the surface. Seeing him jumping around on the surface in his spacesuit, stroking his fingers through the lunar soil, and you just hear James's music playing in the background. It hits you right in the feels. Because like, imagine you're watching your dream, slip away. You're right there. It's right in front of you, but you can't take that extra step, because just things happened. It's such a sad scene though. But man, the visuals of the moon was so beautiful. I cannot express that enough. It's amazing. And another set that I loved was the Mission Control set. Now, just to give you an idea on how close it was to the real thing, real life mission controllers got to visit the set, and some of them thought that they were in the real place. Like, one of them was being interviewed, and he was talking about he walked out of the hallway to use an elevator, but he forgot that this is a set. There is no elevator here. I just thought that was so funny. That just shows you that they made this set as close to the real thing as they possibly could. It was just amazing. When you watch this, you can just tell the amount of respect the crew had for the history, and they were going to make darn sure that it is adapted the right way. And It's so amazing. And I also really the characters in this are so amazing. I just love it watching them all working together to solve problems. Like some of my favorite scenes in this is when Ken Manningly is inside the lunar module model, and he's trying to figure out how to save power to where they can get the guidance computer turned back on so they can figure out where to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. The whole sequence of him trying out different procedures and flipping the switches in a certain order until he figures out what he can do is so cool to see. And you see James's music just kind of building up a little bit in the background, creating this tension. It's so amazing. I love those scenes. And I'm not kidding you when I say that the actors took this job very seriously. One of my favorite performances in this movie is Ed Harris as Gene Kranz. Now, I know that everyone has an opinion, right, about dream casting. Like, an idea of dream casting is like Daniel Day-Lewis playing Lincoln in the movie Lincoln. That's casting done right. Or J.K. Simmons as Jameson in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy. Like, dude, these people were born to play these characters. Ed Harris's portrayal of Gene Kranz in this movie was so spot on. The way he takes leadership, the way he handles a situation, he says things like, "Let's stay cool, people. Get your other support teams in here. Get everybody in here. Get them who you need. Get them in here. Let's work the problem, people. Let's stop make things worse by guessing." It's like, man, I'm telling you right now, I would work for Gene Kranz in a heartbeat. The guy is a genius, and the way he leads his crew through the whole Apollo 13 incident was so breathtaking to see. He's so calm and collective. Let's work through the problem. Nobody freak out. And nobody guess on their numbers. You make sure that data is on point. I don't care how many times you have to check it. Dude, I love that level of leadership. And he never lost his cool once throughout the whole thing. And that was something else they had to change in the movie. There is a few scenes where he does snap at some of the mission controllers, but in real life, the real Gene Kranz never freaked out once. Kept his cool the entire time, and you gotta respect him for that. Like, they were in, like, the whole Apollo 13 incident was like worst case scenario on overdrive. No one planned on a accident this catastrophic happening. Nobody planned this. They never thought in a million years that a situation like this would ever occur. And the fact that they were able to keep their cool and work through this throughout the whole incident just speaks volumes that all these people were the best of the best. Let's see here. Like, the legacy of this movie is just like, I was watching an interview once with Ron Howard, and he said that one of the people he was working with, they told him, it may be another 50-something years before we get back to the moon, but this movie is going to show countless generations how we got there and the legacy of the Apollo program. Like, Ron's like, man, don't tell me that. Don't put that weight on my shoulders. Like, hey, I don't blame Ron one bit for saying that, because, like, that is a lot of pressure to be under. And speaking of pressure, he did a test screening of this movie with all the real-life astronauts and mission controllers. And Ron says that was the most nervous he's ever been at a movie premiere in his entire life. It's like, think about it. You just adapted a real-life story, and you're having the real-life people from the real story watching it. It's like, can you imagine the pressure you're under to make sure that you adapted this the right way? And I gotta be honest, everybody who watched it, they thought that Ron did an amazing job. And it's so awesome, that the real life people, gave him the green light, like, hey, this is good. We think you did a great job, it's just awesome. I highly recommend you check this movie out. It's so inspirational. and it really helps you think about things. It's like, what do you value most? What do you do when things go wrong so fast? Do you panic, or do you sit down, really grasp the situation, and start working through the problems to make it better? And I love those kinds of stories so much. And I'm going to tell you, though, one of my other favorite scenes in this was the re-entry sequence. Oh, man. I want to know how Ron Howard was able to capture this. So during re-entry, right before Apollo 13's capsule re-entered the atmosphere, they detached from their they detached from the command module, and they were able to watch it fly by their window, and they were able to observe the damage from the explosion. And once they realized how catastrophic the damage was, everybody on the ground was worried that the heat shield was damaged. The heat shield is what protects the vehicle from while it's re-entering Earth's atmosphere, and if it's damaged in any way, the capsule will be destroyed during re-entry, and the crew will be killed instantly. But if it's damaged, there's nothing no one can do to fix it. And literally for like 5 minutes, everybody had to sit in total silence until they heard from the crew again, because they had no idea whether or not if the heat shield was damaged. I cannot imagine how nervous everybody was during that whole thing. Just having to sit there in silence, watching their countdown clock go from 4 minutes to 0, because during re-entry, you can't talk to the crew due to the fire of re-entry. It blocks all communication. So for 4 minutes, they can't talk to them. And so they had to wait for communication. And the movie did such an amazing job. My favorite effect during this whole sequence, so the command module was in space for days, so ice built up inside the vehicle. So during re-entry, all the ice melted due to the hot temperatures, and Jim Lovell described it as it was raining inside the command module, and you actually see that. There's these beautiful shots. You see the water running down the boards and the wires and everything, and it's just, dude, I can't express this enough. The detail in this, those little things that were mentioned in the book, and you visually see it. I love it so much. And now we cut to the best part, where NASA starts sending out Apollo 13, this is Houston, do you read me over? It was just an instant loop over and over again. And everybody was so worried. But then we hear from Jim Lovell, hello, Houston, this is 13. It's good to hear from you again. And then you see one of the cameras on board one of the rescue vessels in the ocean, ready to pick up the crew. And you see the command module slowly falling down from the sky with the 3 parachutes out. You hear the amazing music by James playing in the background. It's just like, it makes you want to get up and scream. It's like, yes, they made it. It's so good. It makes you so happy. These kinds of movies are so inspiring. I love it so much. And they touch down, and the crew gets out of the chopper on the boat deck. They start greeting the other crew members and everything. And then Jim Lovell actually had a cameo in this. He played one of the officers that shake hands with Tom Hanks' Jim Lovell. I thought that was an extremely cool little detail that they had Jim make a cameo in this. That was amazing. And the ending quote to this movie sends chills down my spine every time, where Tom Hanks' Jim Lovell, you hear a voiceover where he goes, our mission was called a successful failure, that we returned home but never made it to the moon. In the following months, it was determined that a damaged coil built inside one of the oxygen tanks sparked during the cryostir and caused the explosion that crippled the Odyssey. It was a minor defect that was made before I was even named the flight's commander. Fred Hayes was due to go back to the moon on Apollo 19, but his flight was canceled due to budget cuts. He never flew in space again. Jack Swagger didn't fly again either. After this mission, he was elected into Congress in the city of Colorado, but he died of cancer in 1980 before he was able to take office. Gene Kranz retired as commander in flight operations around the mid-90s, and some of the other mission controllers have moved on to other things, but some are still there. And as for Jim, Apollo 13 was his last flight into space, and he stayed with NASA all the way through the remaining moon landings and Skylab and all that. And he watched for the other moon landings either from Houston or from his house. He still says he looks up at the moon and he wonders, when will we be going back and who will that be? And then the screen goes to black, you see the end, and then the credits start rolling. Dude, that ending sends chills down my back every time I see it. Just what a inspirational ending to this movie. And over 25 years later after its release, it's still one of the greatest based on real life movies I've ever seen. And other movies out there based off true stories I'm a huge fan of. Like you have like the Lincoln movie, The Perfect Storm, just to name a couple. Like I recently just watched another new movie based off a true story called Deepwater Horizon. And I'm realizing the older I get, the more I have a huge love for movies based off true stories. Because when you're watching this, in the back of your mind, you know that this happened in real life, so it makes it that much more interesting to me. But yeah, Apollo 13, one of my favorite movies of all time. Highly recommend you go check it out. I'm so happy that I was given the opportunity to review this movie, because I knew when I was creating this podcast that I was going to review this movie. And I'm actually thinking that I'm going to have a new celebration because this December is going to mark 50 years since the last moon landing, which was Apollo 17. So I'm thinking with the 50th anniversary coming up, I'm going to do a space marathon for the next couple of weeks where I will be reviewing space movies. So just name off some new other films I would love to review in the future is The Martian, First Man, and Hidden Figures. Just to name a couple. And there could be more, but you'll have to stay tuned in to find out. So yeah, I might have to think about starting a space-themed marathon reviewing space films. It's just an idea for now. I don't know whether I'm going to go through with it, but until next time, man, hey, you stay classy out there. You enjoy the rest of your day, and I hope that you enjoyed this recording, and I'll see all you in the next one. And like I always say, until next time, this is DJ Apollo here on the Tales of Music and Film.